There we go. That last one, yeah. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to do a really quick review of some trail design basics. So Seattle Parks has a standard for pedestrian trails, 4-foot wide crushed rock trail with selective pruning within 3 feet of the trail to keep some comfortable sightlines open. Walking trails tend to be fairly direct to discourage walkers from creating shortcuts. Let's see next. Can I control this now? Pedestrian trails range in running slopes from 0 to 10% without steps, from 10 to 20% with water bars, which is an occasional step, and 20 to 50% with timber stairs such as these. Next. So national standards for a forest mountain bike trail are for a 1-foot to 3-foot wide trail built on the mineral soil surface, like a typical hiking trail. Mountain bike trails tend to have a lot of twists and turns to keep speeds safe and slow. And they also have banked turns to control erosion and to keep riders on the path. There are a lot of construction techniques to address different situations, such as using boulders and logs to create pinch points to help keep riding interesting, slow, and safe, and using or modifying naturally occurring phenomena, such as a downed log, to create an interesting trail section or to cross a sensitive area, such as a stream bed. We want to make sure that people of all abilities can enjoy these trails, and we have found that it is possible to make a substantial portion of the trail wheelchair accessible. The United States Access Board has guidelines for accessibility, which are a little bit different than those many of you may be familiar with for buildings. So next. The maximum sustained slope for wheelchairs on trails is 5%, but 8.3 and even higher gradients are allowable for short distances. And they have some rules for places to pass and texture and openings, that kind of thing. But an important concept in accessible design is that people have different capabilities. For instance, there are very athletic wheelchair users who might feel that they can handle a steeper or more difficult trail. So the idea is to provide them with enough information to make the decision for themselves. This example of a sign, it has notes about cross slopes, surface, the width, and this is a grade profile that shows how long the steep bits of the trail are. Next. And so here's a little graphic we did to show what happens at an intersection. So if you've got the 4-foot wide pedestrian lane going this way, and then you have the narrower bike lane making a crossing, these are some of the techniques that we would use to manage that intersection for maximum safety. Since the bike lane is a strictly one-way loop, it is fairly easy to choreograph routes so that the riders are always climbing at a very slow, controlled speed when they cross the pedestrian path. We can use the natural materials along the edge to create pinch points in the bike lane, as well as roughening the surface to slow them down further. Selective trimming in the area of the intersection would be used to keep vegetation low for open sight lines near the intersection. And there would be signposts alerting walkers and riders to the intersection and reminding them of the rules of the road. Next. So this, at long last, is the actual trail plan. So keep your eyes, this light is making it harder to read the symbols on here. But the orange line is the bike lane. This dark purple line is the pedestrian lane. So what you'll probably notice immediately is that in some places they're shared, in some very limited places they're shared. In a lot of places they're more or less parallel to each other. And there are some places, for instance, where the bike lane does a little jog, but the pedestrian lane goes straight ahead. The bike lane has to do a jog to deal with the with the topography and the gradient, but the pedestrians would probably just cut across that, so they can go straight in, so they do.
Maggie, excuse me, do you have this on a handout, right?
I
Can we
was
pass
gonna-
that?
Yeah, I was gonna hand it out afterwards.
Well, I just think it'd be easier for people to be
Okay.
following you if they had it in front of them.
All right, let's do that. So I have a handout. Yeah, you can take that.
Thanks, John. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so all that preparation I gave you about contours and slopes, that helps explain like why there are wiggles here and there. And it also helps explain why on the western edge, we have completely separated the bike lane from the pedestrian lane. Because these are some of the steepest slopes on the site that we felt could handle the bike lane well, but we felt that the pedestrian lane would have too much impact on those very steep slopes. So in this location, the pedestrian lane goes up and joins the trail along Chisi Boulevard, the existing trail on Chisi Boulevard. So there's a complete loop for pedestrians and there's a complete loop for bikes. They intersect at some points, particularly when crossing these wetlands, they're sharing a bridge. But what we're trying to do is optimize the experience for each user group. The other thing that's real interesting to point out is these areas that have the white background, this kind of shaded white, are areas that are accessible trails. So I find it really exciting that along the west edge, almost the entire length of this can be wheelchair accessible. There's a little place here where we couldn't quite hack it, but some of those athletic wheelchair users might decide they want to try that. But here, if we can do these like little switchbacks here, we can make a really nice wheelchair loop here. This route up here, so here's a route that is accessible and for all pedestrians to get down to that flat overlet area that I was telling you about. So this would be a neat trail. This possibly would be one of the more expensive bits of trail because it does cross a steep bit here, and it might have to have some kind of construction technique such as a boardwalk on pylons or something like that. So I'm going to move to the next slide. Oops, I'm sorry, I tried to do it. Now I can't do it. Did I screw things up with this? Oh, no. All right, so you're probably wondering how does that look overlaid on top of the topography map? So here it is. And what you can see is that there's a few areas where we're crossing fairly steep slopes, but talking with the geotech, it says steepness isn't everything. And for instance, if it is a native, solid steep slope, it may be perfectly acceptable to cross it. In this area, the bike lane that we're showing is just nicking that steepest part of the site. So when we do the field layout, one of the things we're going to be looking for is this steep slope exactly where the map says it is? Because we don't want to do a lot of changing it around and plan, and then go out there to find like, oh, it's 20 feet off. And then also, as I said, if we feel like we need to cross there, the geotech will, I'm sure in this area, will want to take borings to study it further and tell us what we need to do to make sure that it works out really well. So, next. Oh, can you go back one? Sorry. One thing I neglected to point out is that we've included, there's already a social trail going up the Andover right-of-way. We think that that would be best served by formalizing that. It would require some steps near the top and near the bottom, and that links in well to the pedestrian trail. Next. Okay, so here's the cross section. So this is a cross-section that starts up at the park storage yard. This is through that kind of narrow place on the map. So here's the end of the park storage yard. This is that kind of flattish overlook area I was talking about. And this is the actual steepness of the slope showing coming down to Rainier Vista. So this shows pedestrian paths near the top, approximately where the bike lane would go, and then further down near the property line at the bottom, this combined boardwalk that would be bikes and pedestrians crossing into the wetland.
So Maggie, we're looking at this map this way, cross-section?
Yeah, if you, okay, looking at your map, if you drew a line right through the parks maintenance yard, and right through, so that, but we cut off the top right so that you don't actually see much of the parks maintenance yard, because that's just too uninteresting to show.
And along this right here, about?
No, it just goes straight down.
Oh,
Yeah.
just straight down that?
Yeah, just straight
These
down.
are the two parts of the traction loop and then the bike lane
Gotcha.
here and then way down here where the boardwalk is.
Okay, yeah. So next.
Okay, so I'm going to talk for a minute about entries. I think these are shown on your map a little smaller. We anticipate that the two main entries will be the Jefferson entry. And I think this is a great main entry because we want to encourage, you know, it's supposed to be a neighborhood draw, and people who are going to come by here would be encouraged to use light rail and also to bike to the park. If anyone would come visit the park by car, would be encouraged to park up on Beacon Avenue. And this entry are equally bike, pedestrian, and wheelchair accessible. There's a number of smaller pedestrian-only entries here, 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 and here. And of those, this one is also wheelchair accessible. There's a couple of little dots called trail info nodes, and that's where we expect there would be a kiosk that has a lot of information, and I'll describe that in a minute. There's also this real interesting little spot we're calling the Cheesty Viewpoint. So it's just, there's one of those ridges coming down here, and there's a fairly flat spot, but it's a nice place to kind of venture in and look out over the edge. And theoretically is also handicap accessible. So next. Okay,
Sorry,
handicap accessible.
that ridge?
Yeah, that little ridge from the road to this little viewpoint right here, that little stretch is handicap accessible. So someone could pull in there and just kind of get experience of being in the woods. So now I want to get into what kinds of things you would see at trail entries and at the info nodes. So, you know, of course there'd be a rainbow sign. Parks only allows you to have one per facility. I imagine it would be up near the top, near the Jefferson entry. At the info nodes, we need a couple of strong places that would catch most users coming in and out of the park that has a lot of information on it. And also, it would be a good idea to have some bike racks for people, maybe people who aren't even using the bike trail, but who want to bike to the park. Next. So on that info node, you would expect to see a lot of trail information. So it might have some of this, you know, kind of gradient information we were talking about. Also, rules of the road, how to use the trails. It's also a great place to have some interpretive information. You know, you could even have kind of a scavenger hunt style, like go look for these things out in the wood, you know, go look for this kind of fern, for instance. And I imagine these are also great places to post announcements for upcoming restoration work parties, etc. Next. So that's the main signage that would be near the entries. Now, on the trail system itself, the go-to design would be the park standard wayfinding posts. So park standards, they have this big 6x6, it's about 4.5 feet tall, and then they have a smaller, more modest one. This big one can carry a lot of information. It can have park hours, other park rules, the rules of the road, as well as wayfinding. And this is a good device for minor entries. And these smaller ones would be great for wayfinding along the way and for those like intersection warning spots. This kind of information would of course be on signage in the park, but personally I don't like this particular sign. I think we can handle it a little more inconspicuously on the Seattle Park Signage Trail Course. Next. And this is what they look like compared to people along the trail. You can see they're kind of a modest scale. Next. And at Seward Park, you may be familiar with these trail posts. At Seward Park, they were very, very concerned about the impact of trail posts in the woods, and so therefore designed a version of those wayfinding posts that are actually etched in stone, and these are salt columns. And there's one right here. It really disappears. You can barely see it at the trail intersection.
All the triangles are the infill, right? All the triangles on the map are signed.
No. I think are they orange? The little kind of arrowheads are indicating the direction of the
Okay.
bike travel. Yeah, the little, the info areas, there's one near the Jefferson entry, and there's one near the Rainier Vista entry. So it's kind of where the trails converge. Can you go back to a plan? Yeah, that's fine. So here's one info node. So we see this as really a place where you're just kind of flat up here, and there's that. Sorry, I'm not talking to the microphone. It's kind of flat, relatively flat. There's a lawn. We see this as being a good place for the trail system to start, and so there'd be a lot of information here. There'd be some kind of devices for getting the bikers to get off their bikes, see what the rolls are, etc. before they take off down the trail. Something similar happening at this point. Yes. Oh, yeah. And we are at the last slide. And, can you go back to that one with the pictures? With the second to last slide. If you go backwards too.
Let's do it again.
It's all the way at the other end.
Yeah.
I was wanting to end on a high note here. Back one, there we go. So anyway, in this last slide, I just wanted to kind of end with some images to remind people of the vision of nature engagement and restoration and joy and connection, all the kinds of things that we hope that this project will accomplish. With that,
Great, thank you.
The show is completed.
Good job, and only 5 minutes over. Excellent work. All right, let's take a 10-minute break, come back, sit down, and talk about this some more.